Hi, I'm Kelly Thomas. Welcome to Ingenious Baby. Every week I'll interview leading experts to help you help your child reach their full potential so that your child can become all that they were born to be. For the last 40 years, scientific researchers have declared Denmark the happiest on earth. Not only is it the happiest country, but also one of the smartest. Mensa ranks Denmark number 5 when it comes to the number of genius per capita. Today, we're here with Jessica Joelle Alexander, a Danish parenting expert and best-selling author of the book, The Danish Way. She's here to tell us the real secret to the Danes' happiness and how to cultivate our own happy children. So, Jessica, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Why does Denmark have the happiest children on earth?
I think it's because of the parenting. I've been married to a Dane for 17 years, and when we first met, I was not a maternal person. I didn't think that I even wanted to have children. And then I saw the children in Denmark, and they were so serene and happy and well-behaved. And I said to my husband, if I can have a Danish child, I want to have children. And then many years later, when I was pregnant with my daughter, I was put on bed rest and I read many, many books on parenting because I wanted to be very prepared. And what I found after my daughter was born was that instead of going to the books, I always preferred my Danish family and friends' advice to anything I read. And this became just natural for me. This is what I always did. Mm-hmm. And then one day, years later, I was reading in the newspaper that Denmark had been voted as the happiest people in the world. And at the same time, my husband was changing my daughter's language around her fear of something. This is a very Danish parenting practice. And I just thought, oh my gosh, it must be the parenting, because happy children grow up to be happy parents who raise happy children. And I felt that it had helped me so much that I knew it could help others.
I loved your book, and I actually use it for my own children who are 2 and 3, and I use a lot of your advice to help parents. But I do want to know, what is it really like to be in Denmark raising a young child?
Well, I actually don't live in Denmark, and the reason that I wrote the book was because I feel that the Danish way is something that we can import anywhere. Mm-hmm. So I don't believe that the tenets are not about what Denmark offers. It's about what they believe that we can do and implement anywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. And actually a lot of people ask me, they say, how can we recreate this? Because they have a very good social system, for example. Mm-hmm. And I always say that actually I think that if we raise our children and teach them empathy and some of the things they teach them in Denmark, our children will grow up to change the system.
From the 0 to 3, like the real early years, is there anything different that the parents do during that time frame that maybe someone else in America or other countries don't do?
Absolutely. So one of the things is they engage in a lot of free play. Mm-hmm. The idea of over-programming kids, or there's much less competition mm-hmm. in general. A lot more support between parents as well. And but definitely no over-programming. They're not checking every milestone mm-hmm. as much because they want children to have self-esteem and not base it on these kind of measurements, mm-hmm. which we sort of tend to get into that in the US sometimes, is we're mm-hmm. very interested in, how fast our kids can do something. And we talk about it, and that kind of puts a little bit of pressure on. So that's definitely something they do differently.
I found really interesting in your book is that the kids they don't have a lot of toys. I think people here just buy so much stuff, and their kids are always wanting a lot of stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that? About
yes.
Just more simplicity.
The reason that I think Hygge is so interesting is because it's something that has really dramatically changed my American family. So my relationship with my American family. Basically, Hygge is a very, very Danish concept. It's something that Danes grow up with, so it's completely normal for them. They don't have to think about Hygge. They just do it. A lot of people are talking about Hygge, but they talk about it in terms of like candles and mm-hmm. warm tea. And for me, I don't think that that's why Hygge makes you happy. Mm-hmm. So I think Danes see it as Hygge is candles and tea because they grow up with it. It's so natural. For us, as non-Danes, in order to make Hygge happen, it's a psychological space. So Hygge is basically, you have to imagine that you enter into a psychological space with your family. In this space, you leave outside your complaining, your negativity, your work stress, anything, controversial discussions, politics. And for these moments, you are just present with the ones you love. You can focus on the food, you can talk about good memories, you can just be there with the people you love. And I know that it sounds really simple, but actually for us, it takes some awareness to make it happen, because we're so used to, a lot of families have these sort of habits where we either we're negative or we have our phones or we're stressed out. But if you can just decide for a period of time in the day to be present with your loved ones without anything else, it is extremely recharging for the soul. And the children are the ones that benefit the most from this. It's amazing how much they love to be with their families in a drama-free environment.
Yeah, that's so important, I think, in the early years. I know Denmark doesn't start formal schooling until about age 6, but I do understand that people put their children in daycare starting around 8 months. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So they have a very great social system, and which is very supportive of families and new moms, and so obviously that helps a lot. But one of the things that they really encourage up until the age of 6, as I said, is this idea of play. So not over-programming their lives. Play is considered the most important thing a child can do in Denmark. And that is something that I've had to really change my perspective on outside, as having my American hat on, to really just relax and say, I know that this is really good for them, and to stand back and to not hover and to let them fall down sometimes, and to believe that they are learning empathy, negotiation skills, resilience. It's teaching them so many things, and we're starting to know that now, and we're starting to believe it. But I think we've gotten into this belief that we have to sort of program their lives.
But what are they actually doing in the daycare? I mean, because people talk about the free play here, and especially that age group, you think you're letting them play. How is it really different, though, than the free play here, for example?
They have very simple toys, I would say, compared to what we have. They have much less stuff. We were talking about that earlier when we were talking about Hygge. In general, Danes have less stuff than we have. And as I said, like, natural toys have never gone out of style. So it's all wood, you don't find a lot of plasticky things, or and the simpler the better. So for example, they have they're called forest kindergartens. Have you heard of that, forest kindergartens?
I haven't, no.
So these are basically very popular, and children go from morning to night to the forest in a warm suit, and they spend the whole day climbing trees, whittling sticks with knives, jumping around on logs. It's amazing. And this is, doesn't matter what the weather is. It's just they're outdoors from morning to night. And yeah, I mean, looking at the research, this is very, very good for children, actually.
My child, for example, my 3-year-old, he asked me, he said he wants to take violin lessons, and he proactively asked me, I mean, what do they frown on things like that, of like actually putting them in some kind of a lesson or music of the child?
No, basically they have something called the zone of proximal development, which this is how all of their learning is based. So basically they're always trying to find the sweet spot of learning. That's how I call it. So they don't want a child to feel too pushed or too pulled. So it's about, I think in the book we use the analogy of helping a child climb over a log. And at first you hold their hand, and then you hold their finger, and then you let them go. You don't push them over the log, and you don't carry them over. So it's all about getting them right to where they're still interested, and they're curious, and they want to learn, but it comes from them. This is the sort of the crux of it. They want to build this, it's called an internal locus of control. They want them to build the desire from within. to keep learning. So of course, if they're interested in something, that's completely encouraged. It's just that they don't, I think that we get pressure from other parents and society when we hear, oh, well, my child learned to read it too, or my child's in baby yoga, or my child is in the, gifted Harvard preschool, whatever. So it's really, it's a challenge to step away from that.
There is so much competition I hear between parents and things like that, which leads me to another question. So Denmark is number 5 according to the number of geniuses per capita. What do you think the correlation is with, you don't have a focus on academics, or achievement, but you're the happiest. What is the relationship there?
Well, I'm actually writing a book about this right now. And I was just in Denmark. I've been all over with the schools, and it is so interesting what they're doing with education. And one of the things that they're doing is there is a huge focus on well-being. So there's a huge focus on, they call it trivelse, which means, it means well-being of the students, so social emotional skills. Mm-hmm. And in fact, they have very few national tests, but the one national test they do have that all ages take across the country is how good they feel. Do they feel seen and heard? Do they feel happy? Are they feeling bullied? So they can measure the well-being of students across schools, and they have plans of how to improve that, because they know that the better children feel, the better their self-esteem is, the better they do academically. I think it's so interesting. It's like we focus so much on academics,
right,
that we forget to also build up the self-esteem, which is different than being good at a lot of things.
Right, and so building that up early is important. Having that sense of self and confidence ultimately will want them to learn and achieve. So how is the academics different than, how is it structured there?
So there's a lot less of this standardized testing. Mm-hmm. There's not the grades. They don't get grades until they're, I think, 11. They make individual goal plans, which are not just about academics. It's also about, how can I be a better friend? How can I, how can I be a better presenter? All these, different things. And so academically, they work also a lot in groups. So I think 60% of the work in Denmark is done in group work. And this is collaborative learning. And so basically all the studies show that this increases empathy, which is, we're seeing now is a huge factor in successful leaders and managers and businesses. And so again, it's about the student being self-driven.
You said something about empathy, and I want to go there because you had a whole chapter about that. Why is empathy so important?
Empathy is really, I learned so much about empathy from the Danish Way, and it's totally changed my life as a person and as a parent. Basically, the reason empathy is important is because it's what really connects us to other people. And it's a skill. We know now that empathy has to be taught. We are born with the capacity for empathy, but we have to learn to hook up to other people. And so feeling connected to others is one of the fundamental basis of happiness. It helps us repair relationships. It's really an important part of our lives. And like I said in the book, they teach it in Denmark to children. And so they grow up naturally being a lot more empathic. It's also voted as one of the most empathic countries in the world.
A lot of things going there.
A lot of things.
Do you think the kids here are less empathetic in the U.S. in general?
Well, studies show that empathy has dropped like up to 50% in the last 30, 40 years in America. Mm-hmm. There's also these studies are in the book. And I think there's a lot of reasons this could be, but one of them is partly because I don't think we see it so much as something that we should teach. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because we can't measure it. We can't really give a grade on empathy. We can't really give a standardized test on empathy. And this is where I'm hoping that when people look at the test results of Denmark and how great they're doing in so many things, maybe we can change our focus to more things that are clearly working to making happy people. Even if we can't measure it, it's working.
So what are some things that we can do to get our children to be more empathetic?
Oh, well, there's a lot of things. For one thing, Danes read a lot of different kinds of stories to their children that don't always have a happy ending. So reading stories that talk about upsetting feelings, difficult emotions, builds empathy. For example, the Little Mermaid. Many people think that the Little Mermaid falls in love, she gets the prince, and she lives happily ever after. But the real Little Mermaid is Danish. It's a Danish story. And she actually dies of sadness because he doesn't fall in love with her and she turns into sea foam. So I've read both versions with my daughter, and she really preferred the sad version because it opened up so many discussions. We talked about a lot of different feelings, and that's also giving language to feelings. So that's just one example, yeah.
Where can we find some of these real Danish fairy tales? Can we find those books here?
Absolutely. So Hans Christian Andersen, who is probably one of the most famous Danes, a lot of his fairy tales are actually sad or ambiguous, and yeah, you can find those everywhere.
I want to talk about reframing. I love that chapter too. I use it a lot with I have 2 toddlers. Obviously, they get frustrated and anxious. And can you give us an example of maybe a toddler who won't want to go to bed, how you would reframe?
We call this age often the terrible twos. So that means we have this expectation that they're going to be terrible and annoying, and we kind of expect that behavior. And I always noticed in Denmark, they had a very different relationship with toddlers. It just seemed much more smooth and calm and happy. And then I realized they call the terrible twos trosalder, which means it's the boundary pushing age or the independence phase. So it's seen as a very healthy behavior. It's welcomed. It's even seen as cute. And this, when you reframe that into being something positive, you react very differently as a parent. And I think the reframing is obviously it's not just for children, it's also for us and how we see ourselves and how we see our lives. And we are the teachers to our children. So the more we get better at reframing, the better they are. Actually, that's what really inspired me to write the book, was listening to my husband reframing with my daughter and reading the newspaper. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing to have this Danish influence. This will affect her for the rest of her life. Because he was changing her fear of a spider into curiosity and openness. And she loves bugs now. So she could have been afraid of them.
Especially for the parents. I think it's even for me, sometimes I have to, like you said, step outside and really just relook at the situation and reframe from a parenting perspective too.
And I think another thing to remember is there's a word in Latin, it's nomen est omen, which means the name becomes outcome, basically. So when we label children, often we're labeling them, oh, he's so annoying, or he's sneaky, or, these words are so important because children hear these words and they try to make sense of them. So if you say it even casually, they think, oh, well, mom says this, so that must be how I am. And that's why it's so important to find the more positive aspect of a label. And it's really interesting when you consider ourselves and how much we believe about ourselves came from our childhood. So right. We can even reframe our own stories, but be aware that they hear us and the words we use are really important.
Absolutely, I agree. If there was one thing that you could tell an American parent to take away from the Danish style of parenting, what would it be?
Teach respect, be respectful, and you will be respected.
For more information about your research and work, where can people go?
You can go to either joellealexander.com, a lot of my articles are there, or thedanishway.com. You can find a lot of information. And of course, you can find the book pretty much everywhere, I think.
So thank you so much for being here and sharing all your tips, which I think are especially important for parents of young children. You set these thoughts and habits up early. It's very important.
Thanks a lot for having me.
If you know someone who'd be a great fit for the show, come on over to ingeniousbaby.com and share your tips and story ideas. You are your baby's first and best teacher.